Cool. Hi, everyone. We are Kevin and
Allegra.
Allegra from Climate Flow. And today's podcast, we're going to talk about nature nurture, the everlasting debate about, yeah, where do our behavioral traits come from? What do you think, Allegra?
It's such a huge topic.
Yeah,
It is it is very much a like philosophical question that has been tried to be answered through science more and more.
yeah,
And I've seen it in a lot of different topics and applied in different sectors. Of course, there is the climbing aspect and like sport performance element,
yeah,
and like is exceptional performance more driven by nature, by nurture? How old were the person when they started physical activity, or does it have to do with some genetic predisposition and all these kind of things? Um, it is something that it also been applied to psychology.
yeah,
So trying to see whether some traits are mostly driven by nature or so genetics
yeah,
or to the environment.
yeah. But
For example, like it's something that we quantify in psychology. That I think is the thing
okay.
that I think is the most interesting and that people do not really know that there are studies and ways in behavioral genetics that look into what is the technical term is the percentage of the variance explained by genes.
Okay. And what is that percentage?
It really depends on what you're measuring. So, for
Okay.
example, some of the in psychology, one of the most studied trait that has been quantified to see how much is driven by genetic. Actually, the pie chart is divided in three sectors.
Okay.
One is genetic,
Yeah.
one is environment,
Yeah.
and the third is the interaction between genetics and environment.
Okay, yeah.
And for example, if you have a certain genetic predisposition that could lead you towards looking for a specific type of environment that
Yeah,
you
okay.
wouldn't seek out otherwise,
Okay.
vice versa.
Yeah.
So one of the most studied traits has been intelligence.
Okay.
There's a lot of important questions raised about like, is the intelligence mostly genetic? Is it something environmental? It's something that can be improved with improved environmental conditions or education and all these kind of things.
And I guess that intelligence can also be measured and quantified, right?
And we're talking about intelligence as measured by the IQ.
Okay. Cool.
Um, of course, we can talk for a long time about what intelligence is and how we talk about it in everyday life compared to how we talk about it in psychology.
Yeah.
I could say that the very much easiest definition that we could say we could use for this type of measurements. So, what is the IQ measuring? Is the ability of the mind to create connections between events. So
Okay.
see links between elements in the world. That is what basically the IQ is measuring in a
Okay.
few words. So
Have you ever done an IQ test?
absolutely.
And what score did you get?
I mean, the first time that I've done an IQ test was my entrance exam at university.
Okay.
So afterwards, when I studied intelligence, I know that, okay, I see what they're doing.
Yeah.
My university test was like 80% logic, and then there was English and some analysis of text and graphs, nothing
So
else.
did you do it in English?
No, it was in Italian, but
Okay.
there was a part that was in English for English because English was necessary to get into the university as well.
Okay.
I have done an IQ test. I have administered IQ tests as well.
Okay.
So it is mostly to children actually, because I've
Okay.
done a course about that. and the scales for measuring in children. I won't disclose my IQ in public.
Oh no.
I mean, it's not about shame or anything. It's like people
I
do
no
not
no
know
no.
how to take this information,
I know.
and I would need to have a podcast only on that. So
Yeah.
let's see.
Okay. Cool.
Um,
Sorry, I cut in there.
no, no, it's fine. It's fine. Is it above average? Yes, it's above average, as most university students are.
Okay.
Um, I wouldn't say more than that.
Okay. Cool. Fine.
But yeah, so the thing is that we quantify. We have a lot of studies about intelligence because, especially in America, there have been a lot of IQ administered to a huge part of the population.
Yeah.
Historically, like America has a very big tradition on standardized tests.
Yeah.
But there's the data and state studies from Europe and other parts of the world, of course.
Yeah.
And what we can say is that it is quite established that intelligence has a 50% of variance that is explained by genes. It's
Okay.
what is
What does that mean?
inherited. It's what is inherited by your parents,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah.
And it means that if you have two twins, for example,
Yeah.
um, identical twins that have been separated, adopted, and all these kind of things,
Yeah.
you would see that their IQ scores would correlate with a correlation of 0.5.
What does that mean?
It means that when, like, identical twins have exactly the same genome. They have exactly the same DNA.
Okay. Yeah.
And if intelligence was only based on genes, then the twins would have exactly the same IQ,
Yeah.
right?
Technically speaking.
Technically, like there are other things that can be, but it's a very big topic. It's a very big area of studies. There is epigenetics, a lot of other things that go in between. But you can still make estimations about, yeah, what
So,
is the correlation? Yeah.
so if you have two identical twins, they have the same genetics.
Yes.
Um, does that mean that they have the same kind of brain makeup? So
No, no, that is not exactly true. And that is because the brain is developed since actually in the womb,
yeah.
with the interaction with the environment. So the way that the brain gets wired changes depending on environmental stimulus and how they interact
Okay.
together. Again, so for example, let's say that one kid is born with a very difficult temperament. For example,
Yeah.
they cannot sleep.
Yeah.
And this can stress out the parent and the caregiver a lot.
Yeah.
And this changes the way that the caregiver interacts with the child.
Yeah.
And that influences the development of the child. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't be the same if the child were able to sleep normally, for
Yeah.
example. So no, twins do not have the same brain, absolutely not. That is also why identical twins have very different personalities,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they are different individuals.
Yeah.
But they do have a lot in common, and intelligence correlates, like, yeah, with a correlation of 0.5, meaning that you can predict the intelligence of the other twin
Yeah.
quite well.
Okay.
And you would have a bit of variation, yes, but the 0.5 as a correlation is quite high.
Okay. So the point
And
five meaning that if one of the twins has got an IQ of 100, the other one is likely to have 100 or maybe 100.5 or
yeah, yeah,
99.5.
something like that, or
Okay.
95, but in that range.
Okay.
It's quite close for sure.
Okay.
Um, so it is a quite high correlation. It's not highest. It means that like half of the variation that you see is given by the genes, but the other half is given by the environment. So the closest is the environment,
Yeah.
the close the IQ of the identical twins will be. So when twins are growing up together, they are born at the same time. They
Yeah.
share the same parents.
Yeah.
And they share the same parents at the same time, which doesn't happen with the siblings. So normal siblings are born one before the other, and the parent changes and adapts their behavior with the second child,
Of
depending on how,
course. Yeah. Completely.
right?
Yeah. I just look at my own kids, and yeah, it's completely different.
So
Yeah.
the type of environment is slightly different
Yeah.
for brothers compared to identical twins or non-identical twins. And you can compare identical twins and non-identical twins. Non-identical twins basically share roughly the same environment, but they don't have the same DNA,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
They are like, as DNA, they are like normal brothers.
Yeah.
They share very similar environments. And then you can make the comparison between the two of them. But yes, like if the twins, the identical twins, share almost the same environment,
Yeah.
which happens quite often until a certain age, then the IQ would be very, very similar. Um, However, identical twins also go through a lot of times like phases in life where they want to differentiate each other. They
Yeah. Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to like develop their own identity
Yeah.
independently from the other twin, and they start making different friends.
Yeah.
The more they grow, the more they become independent from the parents, and they create more their own environment, and that
Yeah.
will influence their development in a different way. And
Yeah.
then they will study different things. They will feel that they are more interested in one thing compared to the other. They would look at different
Yeah.
information on the internet, different TV shows. The environment changes more and more.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
So
Exponentially over time.
the more they grow, the less identical twins IQ correlates
Yeah.
because the environmental part of it is changing.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah.
Right? So when they're younger, you can find very, very high correlations of IQ when they live in the same household and all these kind of things.
Yeah.
So you can find correlations that are higher than 0.5.
Yeah. But
And
so when it comes to genetics, if you have like, I know we're talking about identical twins, but if you have identical twins, I heard somewhere that I guess as a human being we have 700 around 700. I don't know how true this is. It's just something I picked up somewhere that there are 700 traits that we have as a human being that's set within us from the moment we're born because of the genetical makeup we have.
um, I don't know the statement in itself. I
Okay.
would have to look into it. The
And
thing is that,
does genetics make up our brain and the way our brain interacts? I know we're talking about intelligence, but does it yeah, does
okay, let me start from
okay.
here. So, of course, let's say that the hardware of our brain starts with the genes.
Yeah,
Okay, the genes say make these proteins, these fats, and all these things, and put them together into a brain.
yeah,
The thing is that, for example, when you are born, when you are conceived, your brain is not made by chemical um, neurotransmitters.
yeah,
We think about serotonin and all these kind of things. Those are chemical neurotransmitters. We start with electrical um, transmission of information in the brain is faster, is and it's also much much more malleable. So what happens is that we start with a much higher number of synapses, and then depending on the stimulus that you receive already from the womb, and then when you develop, these synapses are cut and some are destroyed. Some die, some other grow, and some other become stronger because the brain recognizes that that is a kind of stimulus that is important to be held, to be
And
maintained.
by synapses, you mean like
Synapses are the connection between neurons.
yes, yeah,
So
within
the
the
neuron
brain.
is made with the long line, the axon, and it has all of different connections.
Yeah,
And these connections are made between neurons,
yeah,
and that makes the pathways of the brain, right?
yeah.
So from the very, very, very beginning, the brain, as it's developed, the development of a brain is the death of synapses,
Okay.
and that is dependent on the environment,
Yeah,
highly dependent on the environment. Also, we have to say another thing. Um, we have a DNA.
yeah,
DNA is made with different bases that sends, like, that makes a message to transform certain compounds into elements like proteins, okay,
yeah.
for example. The thing is that not all the DNA is transcribed and translated. There are some genes that are silenced and some genes that are not silenced.
Okay,
That is dependent on other genes and so on. So not everything you have in your DNA gets expressed,
okay.
okay? And for example, brown eyes
Yeah,
are defined by a dominant gene,
okay.
okay? Which means that in your DNA, do you have brown eyes? I think you have
I do
brown
have
eyes.
brown eyes. Yeah.
Yes, you have brown eyes. I have blue eyes. Blue eyes is a non-dominant gene.
Okay.
Mean It means that, we have two strands for the DNA. One
Yeah,
comes from mother, the other one from the father. It means that I received a blue gene from my father, who has blue eyes,
yeah.
and I have received the blue gene from my mom, who has brown eyes.
Okay.
Because in her DNA, she had one brown and one blue, but
Yeah,
brown is dominant, therefore she has brown eyes.
yeah.
But her grandfather had blue eyes,
Okay.
and that is where she got the blue part.
Okay.
My brothers have brown eyes. I'm the only one with blue eyes. I'm
Okay.
the only lucky one. But that means that you may have, for example, the blue eye genes in your DNA, but that is not expressed.
Yeah, okay.
And that is because of one of the simplest cases that you can find in your DNA. There are like a lot of more complex situations where the genes are silencing other parts of the DNA that do not get expressed. Now, there is a field of science called epigenetics that is the study of how the environment changes the DNA.
Okay.
For example, you know that sunlight is bad for the skin,
Yeah.
right? It causes skin tumors,
Yeah.
skin cancer. That is because the radiations from the sun impacts the DNA itself, and two bases of the DNA, I think it is adenosine and I don't know them in English, but A and T should go together. And
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, it makes T and T connect together, and they shouldn't, and that creates problems in the expression of the DNA when the RNA comes and all these kind of things. And that causes cancer. Is the sun that is impacting the DNA.
Okay.
So you are born with the DNA, but also your life impacts the DNA itself from a
Yeah.
structural point and also the expressions of the genes.
Okay.
So, for example, we know that smoke influence, smoking, influences the expression of different genes, and your diet changes the expression of your genes.
Hmm.
Your lifestyle changes your DNA, literally.
Okay. I guess so, because if you look at the size of my hands, they've grown since I was little, right? Because I climb a lot. Is that
Oh, I wouldn't, yes, we could say in that case, it's because your DNA and your body is made to react to certain stimuli.
okay?
So if just like as if you get a cut, we grow. the skin so that it can be closed,
Yeah.
if the hands receive the stimulus that says like we need to protect the hands, it will send a message so that you would increase the muscle size in the forearms. It will increase and speed up the production of bone tissue and of cartilage and all of these kind of things to
Okay.
react to the environment. Yes.
So if I then have children, could that not change the genes potentially?
It didn't change, as far as I know,
No. Okay.
this doesn't change the DNA structure itself.
Okay.
That has changed the expressions of the genes. So it's not a characteristic that would be inherited.
Okay.
Okay. Um, but yes, it is incredibly complex, and not all traits, like very few traits really are expressed by one single gene. Like I give you the example of the eye color, like the skin color is the expression of so many different genes.
Yeah.
And that is also something like quite simple to think about, let alone traits like aggressiveness.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. There are studies on the genetic component of aggressiveness, and depending on like the first most important studies were on rats. And basically, what they have done is to mate together the most aggressive rats.
Yeah.
And in the end, they continued this for long enough to get to a point where uh, there was no possibility of getting a rat that was not aggressive by default, because it
Yeah.
saturated completely all the possible combinations of genes that makes a rat aggressive. But of course, we cannot compare the brain of a rat to the brain of a human being,
Yeah.
right? But of course, there is a genetic base that allows it. Okay, like it's difficult to to think about something that happens in our brains, in our lives, that it doesn't have a hardware underneath it.
Yeah.
It's simply impossible. So the brain allows for these variations and this flexibility. Understanding the relationship between genes and environment and the interaction between these two, and I underlie the third factor, that is the interaction, because it is very neglected in our everyday life discourse. It is incredibly strong, this third element, and we tend to forget about it. And when we
The
think
interaction
about
between the
genetic,
genes and their environment.
for example, we have a lot of climbers that are sons and daughters of other climbers.
Yeah.
And they not only inherit the genes that for sure have, I'm talking about professional climbers, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But of course, it can be non-professional climbers too. But imagine, yeah, the children of professional climbers. I'm thinking about, for example, Shona Coxey
Yeah.
or Akio Noguchi and Tomoe Narasaki.
Yeah.
So they are um,
James Pearson and Carolina Civaldini, I think her name is.
exactly. They are not only inheriting the genes that help out um, with climbing. And we could think about, for example, in the Asian population, there is a mobility factor and like the dimensions of the muscles and the different relationship between the length of different limbs and parts of the body. We
Yeah.
know that from that side that there's probably an advantage,
Yeah.
at least for certain types of climbing.
Yeah.
They are also inheriting an environment of parents that are incredibly passionate about climbing,
Yeah.
that are like Aki Noguchi and Tomo Narazaki own a climbing gym
Yeah.
only for themselves,
Yeah.
right? And I mean for other climbers too, but that was made for themselves to prepare for the Olympics.
Yeah.
Same goes for other professional climbers. And they, I saw a post from Shona Coxey
Yeah.
about Frankie. Frankie is the daughter, and seeing her climbing on like scrambling basically on
Yeah.
rocks. And the fact that she is teaching her risk management,
Yeah.
and she's super, super young,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
incredibly young, and about how different it is from usual perspective in everyday life. Like people, she was talking about how people react to seeing Frankie's videos. And like you should teach her to be to be more careful
Yeah.
and all these kind of things. Of course, a lot of like people will always have to say something about your
Of
parenting,
course they do. Yeah.
of course, right?
Yeah.
But that is a very special environment,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
very special environment that is very different. And people will talk about Frankie for her genes,
Yeah. Yeah.
but Frankie was also born in an environment where both parents are extremely strong and capable climbers, and the father is the owner and the developer of the Beastmaker, and
I
the
think it's Ned
yeah.
Free Holly.
Ned.
I got your
I
name
only know
wrong.
him as Ned. I don't remember the surname, but
Yeah.
I mean it's clearly a special family,
Yeah.
and that will definitely impact the development of the child.
Yeah.
Of course, there are a lot of other elements as well. Maybe pressure could be too much,
Yeah.
maybe, or like pressure to do one specific sport. And
Yeah.
then the person might feel the lack of autonomy in choosing for their life directions, or maybe not. There are a lot of climbers that have been born in climbing families and they fully embrace the climbing life and all these kind of things. It really depends on a lot of multiple factors that
Yeah. Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
be predicted.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about environment, genes, and the interaction, we always need to think about the interaction.
Yeah.
Frankie very much probably will be born in with a gene setup that will make her advantage
Give
from
her an advantage in the climbing world. Yeah.
yeah, and that will help with the environment that she is in. So, for
Yeah.
example, if you are born with a genetic setup that doesn't make you very predisposed to climbing, and you are put in a climbing environment, you can experience a lot of frustration. And then there is all the part like, how do you deal with frustrations?
Yeah.
And for example, ADHD kids really look into quick reward. And
Yeah.
so ADHD kids might feel more reward and more driven towards something that they feel that they have predisposition for.
Yeah.
Makes it much more likely that they would engage with that type of content and information,
Yeah.
that type of stimulus in the environment. So that changes. ADHD still, it's another situation itself. Like there, we could talk about genes, environment, and the interaction in itself. I'm not saying that ADHD is a genetic composition of, I'm not saying that it's fully genetic. It is not. It is not. If we're talking about mental disorders, ADHD is a mental disorder. If we're talking about mental disorders, the mental disorder that has the most variants explained by genes is schizophrenia.
Okay.
It's the people that have hallucination.
Okay.
Okay, those type of people that you see at the station that are homeless and
Yeah.
that they look weird and sometimes they're catatonic. A lot of times those are
They're
schizophrenic
watertonic.
people. Catatonic is a person that is barely responding to external stimuli. They can
Okay.
still sitting in a very weird position for hours without moving.
Okay.
That is catatonia. And that has a genetic composition that is of 50%.
Okay.
If you look at brains of people with schizophrenia, their brain is atrophizing. It becomes smaller and smaller with the development of the untreated disease. Okay, it's incredibly biologically based. Like these people are creating a world that is not existing. They can see people, they can hear people. A lot of times, people with schizophrenia hear a lot of voices, right? It's
Okay.
one of the most typical symptom. They can also see hallucinations that are visual. Sometimes they have tactile hallucinations, and one of the most common is like feeling insects crawling on your body.
Okay.
But it is something that they cannot recognize if it's true or not.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So,
It's incredibly strong, incredibly disruptive. It is incredibly misunderstood from a social point of view. So, people with schizophrenia, when they have the first attack, they do not receive the support that they should receive. Do not receive the medications that they should receive, and all these kind of things. Even though we're talking about schizophrenia, the variance explained by genes is 50%.
so 50% of people with schizophrenia is set within them from genetics.
No,
No, sorry.
for each person, a perfect question. That is great. Each person that has
Yeah.
schizophrenia is a result in of factors. Therefore, 50% is the genes, and the rest is the is environment and the interaction with the genes.
Okay. Okay. So
Um,
so
so
50% is set within the genes that they get from mum and dad, and then the other 50% is the interaction between their environment and then the genes and their environment.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. That is for each person.
Okay.
It
So
means
so
that
so
if you don't have schizophrenia or disorders in the spectrum of schizophrenia, because there are others,
yeah.
schizotypal disorder, a lot of different things. But if you have someone in the family with some of these disorders, you have a much higher chance to develop schizophrenia.
Okay.
Schizophrenia is developed by 1% of the population.
Okay. So if we're taking that rationale that people with schizophrenia inherit 50% of like 50% is set within their genes, so
Yeah.
that's inherited. So does that then mean that the rest of us, the human population, inherits 50% of their behavioral traits or their character, sorry, their character traits from their genes?
When it comes to schizophrenia, is this what
No,
we're
so
talking
can we assume that
about?
people who have schizophrenia, they 50% of the schizophrenia is set within the genes?
Yes.
Is that what
So
you're
what
saying?
we're talking about, yes,
So,
what we're
so can
talking
we
about, you
then,
can
can
say it
we,
as where which factor is stronger, genes or environment. And
okay,
when it
so,
comes to schizophrenia, it's like half and half.
okay, so,
So if you have the genes because you have it in the family, and the environment allows it because it gives all the elements of that cocktail that creates schizophrenia, then you
okay,
will develop schizophrenia.
so
If
does
you
it
have
then not tell
very,
us that,
sorry,
that
repeat.
all of our, like 50%, so 50% of our behavioral traits are set within it, or our traits are set within us from genetics?
No, 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 no.
No?
No.
Okay.
Each trait has its own specific balance, let's say cocktail
Okay.
of genetics, environment, and the interaction.
Okay.
For example, personality. If we're
Yeah.
looking into people's personality, one of the most famous and recognized models of personality is called the Big Five personality.
Yeah.
And we're talking about five different personality traits.
Okay.
And we have extroversion, which is extroversion, introversion,
Yeah.
um, agreeableness. Um, I will not tell them in the proper order. I'm sorry,
That's
psychologists.
okay.
Then
I don't
we
care.
have openness to experience, we have conscientiousness, and we have, um, I know them in Italian, I'm translating, so they might be a bit slightly
That's okay.
different. Are you writing them down?
Yeah, I am
Okay.
extrovert, agreeableness,
Extroversion,
openness,
agreeableness,
conscientiousness,
conscientiousness, openness to the experience, and neuroticism.
and neuroticism.
Neuroticism, yes, which is basically emotional stability.
Okay.
Okay. And extroversion is the trait which is most has most variants explained by genes among the five of them. It's still mostly environmental determined.
Okay.
All of the five traits have a strongest element of environment, so how you grow up and how you interact with the world.
Okay. So these five that you mention are
Yeah.
mostly determined by environment and the
All of
interaction.
them are mostly determined by environment. Extroversion is the one that has the most, the strongest genetic component.
Oh,
So
really?
there will be, yes, there will be some part that it is driven, at least in part, by genetics.
Okay.
Openness to experience has basically no genetic predisposition.
Okay. Okay.
It's mostly, like mostly entirely determined by environment, your life experiences, and how you reflect on them.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. So
So
see,
each trait has its own cocktail.
okay. So I'm
And
definitely, if I look at myself as a personality, I've always been an introvert.
mhm,
And I've learned, I guess, over time to become an extrovert to cover
mhm.
up my introvertness.
I was gonna say you're a hyper social introvert.
Hypersocial introvert.
That is how I call myself too.
Okay, cool.
I'm a hyper social introvert. So
Hyper.
like, yeah,
So what does that mean?
I very much enjoy interaction with people, but
Yeah.
it is something that it takes me a lot of energy. So
Okay.
then I need my retiring time where I just stay by myself and I need silence and I need to do those kind of things that help me heal and get more energy back
Ah,
because it is
yeah.
very draining for me.
Okay.
From psychological perspective, this is not an aspect of extroversion. Extroversion is determined by two factors, which is dynamism and dominance.
Okay.
This is in psychology what extroversion is, which is very different from what we say in society.
Okay. Dynamism
Yes,
and
dynamism and dominance.
dominance.
Yeah. So how much you take roles of leadership and all this
That
confidence and all these kind of things.
that depends on, I guess for me, that depends on my where I am socially and who's there.
That is something that determines a lot, like the different levels and variation. So, like the more you take on that role of, for example, dominant role across situations, the strongest is basically your level of extroversion.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can have middle ranges and some people that are neither extroverts nor introverts. But for us, it's difficult to conceptualize. But in psychology, you would have someone that has, depending on the situation, more introverted and traits, and in another situation, more extroverted traits.
Yeah.
When you measure personality in a work context,
Yeah.
you use the same questionnaire and a different scoring scheme
Okay.
because even the environment that you are will change the way that you behave. And the
Yeah.
people that are like in a screening situation for a job will answer differently and will adapt. And they would also represent the way that they behave at work differently compared to the way they behave in their everyday lives.
Yeah.
So it is complex still. When we measure personality traits, we get yeah the strongest element in the cocktail is the environment. And still
Okay.
there are some elements that are in between. So Conscientiousness has a bit of a genetic part, but it's not definitely not as big as extroversion. And as I said, openness to experience
Really?
is basically only environmental driven.
Because conscientiousness is being considerate of other people, right?
Is conscientiousness.
Is that so? Does that mean being considerate of other
It's
people?
not really considered that being considered towards other people is within agreeableness.
Okay. So what do you
Conscientiousness
mean
is
by
how
conscientiousness?
conscientiousness is basically stubbornness or how precise you are, meticulous, and all these kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah, that's conscientiousness. That I'm sure it is in English.
Okay. I guess I
But
score quite highly on stubbornness.
I have, I don't remember my level of conscientiousness. I think it's on the higher side, but not super high. My
Do you have a
highest.
questionnaire for this?
Oh yes, of course I do.
Oh, do you?
I can send it to you.
Oh yeah, send it to me. What I'll do is
Absolutely.
I will add a link onto the website.
No,
So
no, 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 no. I cannot share it with other people.
okay.
It's under license.
Okay. All right, cool. I will
Yeah.
do it for myself.
I I
Sorry
have
guys.
I
Sorry
have a
listeners.
previous version, so it's not as accurate as the newest versions.
Okay.
That is why I have it and I can play around with you, but it cannot be shared. There are some like similar versions that can be found online.
Okay.
They will not be the original and the standard Big Five questionnaire because that is behind paywall,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay. All right. So people have to pay for that.
Yeah, no, but it's incredibly expensive.
Okay.
It is basically for research purposes, or there are some versions for like a selection of personnel
Yeah.
that are sold to companies and all these kind of things.
But I guess with answering questionnaires, then I guess you have to answer it honestly because sometimes one might have the feeling of wanting to answer it correctly.
So within the scale,
Yeah.
there's in this questionnaire there's six scales.
Yeah.
So one for each trait, and one is the lie scale.
Okay.
So we also measure how much you're lying.
Ah, okay. And then depending on how much you lie,
You adjust
you adjust the
the
scores.
scores.
Ah, okay. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good scale. I can
Okay,
say
cool.
the Big Five questionnaire is it's a very good scale. There is a sixth, there's another scale that has been developed that is based on the Big Five questionnaire that is called Hexaco and adds a sixth trait of honesty.
Okay.
So like honesty as a moral trait and see how the person relates to yeah this moral component of behavior.
Okay.
But yeah, some psychologists would say that morality is a different aspect of life compared to personality, and they shouldn't be put together. Some psychologists say no, morality is a part of personality,
Okay.
and and I mean, it depends, but it is basically the same plus one.
Okay.
But yes, so when we're talking about sport and when we're talking about nature nurture, I feel like a lot of people do not realize the importance of the environment
Yeah.
and do not realize how difficult it is to quantify the genetic element within single life, single
Yeah.
person life. And that is because, as I said, the gene will interact with the environment.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is often forgotten.
Yeah. Okay.
But also, for example, when I started climbing, I had a very fast development in my climbing ability.
Yeah.
So I was able to, like, I started with a 5A, barely made to the top in my first climbing day.
Yeah.
And within a year, I climbed my first 7A on lead,
Okay.
something like that, maybe a year, 1 month or something like that.
So why do you think that you progressed so quick?
And I think that when people think about my progression in my first year of climbing, a lot of them say like, "Wow, you were very much prone to climbing." And they also think about they have told me about genetic predisposition. I was like, listen, I have started climbing in my early adult life in a climbing gym that was at literally 7 minutes from my place,
Yeah.
and that had a cost of basically 10 euros a month because it's
Yeah.
a club.
Yeah.
Where I had the possibility of doing route setting after a few months of climbing
Yeah.
whenever I wanted. I started, I think, 3 months after starting climbing to do route setting,
Yeah.
where I had a community that taught me a lot about movement, about the philosophy of climbing, about perseverance. And sure, I definitely have some psychological elements that are given by my background and my predispositions and all of these kind of things
Yeah.
that drove me towards climbing.
Yeah.
For example, like I have been diagnosed with when I was a kid of ADHD, but from a pediatrician, not from a psychiatrist, actually. And the so I wasn't really treated for that. But I have gone to therapy and all these kind of things. So I know that I do not satisfy the criteria for ADHD now,
Okay.
but the reward coming from climbing, from the single clients, from the fact that it's self-directed. You decide which boulder you want to climb.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no one telling you what you have to do, and it's a game. It's a gamified. Definitely, it's something that drove me towards climbing, that motivated me a lot, and drove me to climbing 4 to 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And I had a partner that was a personal trainer, and I had a home gym. I could train whenever I want, whenever I wanted. And I had a lot of fun. I had the possibility to go outdoors and amazing crags
Yeah.
with crazy rock and a lot of lovely people.
Yeah.
I had so many factors that aligned together
Yeah. So is the
into,
majority of it was environment and the interaction with the environment.
I would say environment played a very, very important role.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there was no genetic element.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
for example, when I was a kid, I was being told a lot of time that I had a gift for sports.
Okay.
But probably because of ADHD, I wasn't able to do any type of sport. Like I've tried every sport in the world, but I couldn't be consistent in anything. And I ended up not doing anything for many, many years just because for me, it just became frustration and feeling of not being able to do something for more than like a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then, so from that side, my physical ability was not met uh, by that consistency that was needed for the development of those physical abilities themselves. I needed to learn coordination. I was quite uncoordinated, but I am like I had a lot of different traits that made me quite good at some sports.
Yeah.
So some sports, not others.
Yeah.
So I was very good at like roller skates and balance stuff, but I was
Yeah.
very bad at running, for example.
Yeah. So
But
I
yeah,
guess were you quite sporty as a kid? Did you do a lot of, I don't know.
I, for example, I started skiing when I was 4.
Yeah, okay. So then it's
Right?
environment, isn't it? So
Like my parents were very sporty, and they said we need to make our children start doing sports as early as possible.
yeah,
And all of us started skiing when we were 4.
yeah, yeah,
So, of course, like you would see a kid that is, I don't know, 6, and you say, "Oh, this kid is super good." I
yeah,
was being told that I was good at when I was 4 too, but they're really, what does it mean, and what have these kids done before that? My mom has,
yeah,
for example, has a very unconventional view of risk. My father too, actually.
Okay.
So I would say that me as a child, I grew up as a very risk-prone person.
Yeah. Risk
And
prone meaning that you love taking risk.
I wasn't afraid of anything.
Okay.
I was doing crazy stuff when I was really, really young. And I hurt myself a lot of times. And in the end, I ended up being much more scared after some time. And this braveness that was very much linked to me by other people, like Allegra is incredibly brave, um, became a weight on me.
Okay.
But I
The
was
pressure.
becoming less and less brave. I could
Yeah.
feel more and more scared of things. And at the same time, I felt the pressure like that Allegra is very brave and the pressure to push myself outside of my comfort zone to the point where I didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
And that element that made me quite outstanding in sports as well, I lost.
Yeah. Okay.
And then sports were not interesting to me anymore. And
Because of it.
I
Yeah.
very much preferred other type of things and I got into other interests.
Yeah. Okay. So then that's maybe partly genetics, in like interacting with environment, i.e., what people was telling you.
Like for sure, as I said, that my parents both are also quite risk prone. So I was not raised in an environment with, the parents like trying to overprotect the
Yeah. Yeah.
child.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like my parents were very much of the idea like they will learn the dangers of life by interacting with them,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So and that which is quite uncommon, at least in Italy,
Yeah.
in the place where I grew up. And so it was different and it was seen different. And I may have had the genetic composition because it might have had a role for my parents as well. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were more risk prone than the normal population, maybe like we don't know. And maybe it's something that in part I have taken, but we cannot know.
Yeah.
It is very, very hard to know. Um, which really brings to the question, why do we care so much about this?
People love asking questions, right? We love to know why.
I absolutely agree,
We love to know
but
why does the world exist? Why do we exist? What's the meaning of life? Like why do all the planets exist? Why everything, right?
I agree. But in this case, I think there is a much more subtle element in this nature nurture question,
Okay.
especially when it comes to like psychology and sports, and it is, if it's genetic, then it is not changeable.
Ah,
Something
okay,
that
yeah.
comes from the environment, there's something you can do about it to change it.
Okay.
Because
That's
you
an
cannot
excuse.
change.
That's maybe an excuse we sometimes use to not change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess
Absolutely.
the importance here is that nurture nature, we are going to have a certain amount of things set within our genetics, like our genetical makeup, which will influence the way we are as human beings. Um, but that doesn't mean we can't on purposely change our environment or the way we consciously interact with that environment to create change.
The question, and I completely agree with you. I think that the question here is how much effort does this change require? Because there are very few things that are unchangeable in our lives. And
Okay.
there are, however, they differ a lot in the amount of effort that we need to put into making those changes.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes if it requires a lot more effort,
Yeah.
then it is harder to sustain the frustration. It's
Yeah.
harder to see the success. It's harder to see the reward and to feel satisfied about
Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah. And then personality comes into play, doesn't it? It's
Absolutely.
if you have patience, you might be more likely to create change. If you're stubborn, you might be potentially more likely to create change if you want to make change. But if you then don't, if you're stubborn, you might not create change.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's also about how you use your resources. So if you put your effort your time, your energy, your interest, your studying, looking into, how to improve in your climbing.
Yeah.
You're using that time and that energy into something that can yield some results after some time. But you could also put the same energies and resources into something else that can make you more satisfied sooner.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And
So,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think as human beings, maybe we like, or maybe human beings, I won't say human beings, I think as maybe the society we grow up in, we like instant gratification or quicker gratification.
We could say yes, like we are driven by gratification, and of course, like quicker gratification is something that drives our behavior more strongly.
Yeah.
Like the society that we have created is pushing more and more towards these type of gratifications that are as soon as possible, right? If you
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about TikTok,
Yeah.
they have
Social media. Yeah.
their social medias are created in order to give you this type of gratification as soon as possible. And then there's all the discourse about the fact that we are not able anymore to delay gratification,
Yeah.
right? In a certain sense, we are creating an ADHD society because
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is,
Yeah. Yeah. Short
if you
attention
think about
span.
it, if you think about it.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is the fact that, yeah, sometimes we use um, genetics as an excuse. Sometimes we tend to have a fixed mindset, and we justify it with this narrative. In my opinion, it's mostly about saying, like, listen, you cannot know what your DNA is telling you about yourself.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to test it for yourself.
Yeah.
And the question now is, do you want to do something? How
Yeah.
much do you want this? Is it something you're interested in investing time, resource, and into making a change? What are you willing to give up for this?
Yeah.
Which is a question that unfortunately not enough people are asking themselves,
Yeah.
and they overlook the fact that if they decide to do something, they have to give up something else.
Yeah.
And then I would mostly advise for suspension of the belief and the judgment, whether is it something that comes from the genes or something that can be changed or not. Like explore, experiment, see what your change can give you.
Yeah.
Do you like it? Do you not like it?
Yeah.
Does it give, because also when it comes to like your traits, an activity, let's say sport, let's say climbing, there are so many different factors that influences your climbing for performance, or we could say achievement, right?
Yeah.
Which depends on your goals and your ideas of what you should do when climbing. And climbing is so diverse. You have so many different styles of climbing.
Yeah.
You have so many different types of climbing. Like within bouldering itself, you can have the cave as much as the slab,
Yeah.
right? They rely on very much different physical skills,
Yeah.
very different physical skills. And then there are, like as we said, the personality elements and how they drive the behavior, how much you're willing to spend time on something that you're not good at compared to working on your strength,
Yeah.
how able you are to stop when your body is telling you you're gonna get injured. That is something I'm very, very bad at.
Me too.
And for example, right? And it will influence your climbing career, like if your climb, not career as a, like as a job, but your climbing history. It
Yeah.
will change how much you can climb.
You know who's really
And
good at stopping at the right time?
you were?
No. Do you know who is really good at it?
No.
Emma's really good at it.
Oh,
She's really
nice.
good at listening to her body. I'm not.
I think that it's very much of a requirement for a professional climber.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, they would always get injured, like us.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a really interesting chat with another instructor called Dave Evans, and I think he was saying that we maybe I'm just taking the example as instructors that we are taught to physically work really hard and only feel that we've done a good day's work or a good day's climbing when we feel physically exhausted.
So that is a very much an old school
Yeah,
concept. And I think that one of the reasons why America is going better, better, stronger, stronger, considering all the statistics, for example, in the Olympic Games and like in high performance sports, high level performance in sports, is because they have stopped using this old school
yeah, yeah, yeah,
style of thinking and reasoning, because we know that that is not the most efficient way to improve or to get stronger. Even though it provides the, let's say, the thing is that when someone is taught to have done a good job only when they are exhausted, it means that the person needs to be able to sustain a very high level of stress
yeah.
very frequently. And that leads people to give up on the activity altogether.
Okay.
So we know already that that is not a good way of making people train,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
the easiest way to make them stop training. Okay. Um, and that is one side.
yeah,
Also, we know, like scientifically speaking, when you adjust the load and intensity of the stimulus, you can still provide the growth, and it might be also the most optimal way of developing strength, agility, and whatever. However, if the person is able to sustain that level of stress, you can create a bit of the superhuman person. And there are some, like in the climbing community, we know, for example, that Slovenia and Japan
yeah,
have some of the strongest teams in the world. Like you have so many athletes. In like Slovenia, it's particularly interesting because it's such a small town. It's such a small country with a very little population,
yeah,
right? Japan has a much bigger population.
yeah,
So you could say that statistically there is a higher chance of finding someone that is exceptional.
yeah,
But both Slovenia and Japan have societies and like a mindset when it comes to sports that is ultra competitive and pushes into finding those that can sustain that level of stress.
yeah, yeah,
And if you find them, then they are incredibly strong, they are incredibly capable, and all of these kind of things. But from there to derive the idea that then this is the way, the best way to train people, you fall into what is called the survivor bias.
okay,
Because you
yeah, okay, I
only
see.
look at
Yeah,
those that have
that
survived.
survive, and everybody else comes to the wayside.
Exactly.
Okay.
The most famous example, the first example that came for describing the survivor bias was on airplanes.
Yeah,
They were looking at airplanes during the war and looked at where they were hit. So they would be sending airplanes, they would be shootings. These airplanes will come back and they would see where were they shot.
yeah,
We should reinforce those areas,
yeah.
right? We need to make sure that those were stronger. However, what they discovered is that the reason why those airplanes came back was exactly because those parts were not reinforced and the other parts were. Like the other airplanes that did not come back home
Okay,
were completely neglected. And they should have looked at those airplanes, not those that came back,
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
to do to improve their
yeah,
airplanes, right?
yeah, yeah.
And that was the example of the survival bias. And we have the same when it comes to sport, absolutely. The fact that we don't see all of those that didn't make it because there was a certain type of idea of how people should train. And in the moment where you don't use that type of idea, other people could thrive with other different methods.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you could apply the single training of the champion of the elite to the lay person has been proven to be extremely damaging.
Oh, really?
Extremely damaging, especially when it comes to there was a tradition in sports psychology of looking at the athlete to try to improve like the everyday lifestyle of the everyday person. So how to make them train more.
Yeah.
They looked at the athletes and say, okay, this is what the athletes do. And this is how the athletes train. So let's make them train like athletes. And people were giving up. People were not able to do anything at all, and the results were a disaster.
Okay.
So the question is, do you want to train like an athlete, or do you want to train like a person that wants to discover their limits, that want to see where they can arrive and what is the best for them? Do you want to train as what is the best for you, or do you want to train as what is the best for
Okay.
Yanya Gambit, right?
I'd like to try.
I mean, it is interesting for sure. It opens up to a whole different perspective because the way athletes trains is incredibly taxing, and it's something that can be achieved only if you have backstory of intense training. Like
Yes.
if you
Yeah.
were to train like them,
Yeah.
if I were to train like them, I'm not a professional climber, not even closely. Like I would get injured.
Yeah.
First of all, we know that there is an important genetic predisposition that is important in athletes that is related to injuries. Is
Okay.
one of the most important elements. You can have the strongest person in the world, but if as soon as they move, their back is destroyed, they cannot jump down from the mat and they cannot be boulders,
Yeah. 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 Okay.
right? And for example, it was one of the strongest predictors of ability in when it comes to genetic traits of ability in gymnasts.
Yeah.
Because gymnasts, gymnastic is a discipline that is
Uh,
incredibly taxing and
I guess.
prone to injuries.
Yeah. So I guess that's something we didn't talk about, is it? We talked about genetics and kind of behavioral traits, but we didn't talk about genetics and biological makeup.
I mean, we are talking when we're talking about genetics, we're talking about biological makeup. I think you
Yeah.
mean like physical aspects, like
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Okay. Yeah.
physical
Sorry.
traits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like we know that there are different compositions of muscles. We
Yeah.
know there are types of muscles that are more prone to grow, and some muscles are less prone to grow. And there is also the genetic composition of levers.
Yeah. Is
Or
that
like,
so? So I guess that's why um, I can't remember the exact ins and outs, but if you look at a lot of the 100-meter runners,
yeah,
there are a lot of black people
yes,
that run the 100 meters, and my understanding is that, and I can't remember, I think it's that they have a higher level of concentration of fast twitch fibers in
exactly.
their muscles,
Yes,
which allows them to I guess run like explosive power on a
absolutely.
short amount of distance.
Absolutely. We know that the Black population has a higher concentration of these types of fibers. You're absolutely correct. And this is because Black people from slavery times for thousands of years have been bred to be having these characteristics.
Okay.
So that is why there's a much higher concentration of these muscle fibers in the Black population
Okay.
because they needed to do hard work.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
And also those that couldn't sustain it could also die,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
you know,
So it's like strong will
um,
survive, going back to that
and
argument.
and could reproduce and all these kind of
Yeah.
things. So absolutely, there is a genetic advantage there in the black population. And yes, 100 meters runners are mostly black.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. When it comes to sports like weightlifting, so we're talking about the snatch, the pull and jerk, and like
Yeah.
Olympic
Yeah. Where
weightlifting.
they lift it up above their heads.
Yeah, yeah, all these kind of
Yeah.
things. You can see that the Chinese population and Asian population is doing very well, and that is um, partly because of the levers. So they have more advantageous levers when it comes to the length of their limbs and at the level of their joints, and that allows them to be more explosive in
Okay.
those
And less distance to travel.
less distance of travel. Exactly.
Yeah.
And these are genetic compositions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And again, we're talking about exceptional behaviors.
Yeah.
If I work a lot with athletes, so it is like when I talk to them, when I coach them, or when I work with them, I know what are the characteristics of like that an athlete needs to have, also from a psychological perspective. And when you need to be able to assess them and see like, okay, you are much, much shorter than the average climber. Therefore, you need to compensate in other ways.
Yeah.
They're very creative in your problem solving. You become much more explosive and jumpy
Yeah.
in order to be able to reach further away. And you cannot just be a static lead climber if you want to do bouldering, for example.
Yeah.
And also for lead climbing, I mean, if you don't reach, you need to jump. There's not much else that you can do unless you break the beta. Um, and also from a psychological perspective, we know, for example, that if you are an athlete now, even if you are a lead climber, one of the most important psychological characteristics and skills that you have to either have or develop is risk proneness, the ability to accept risk and to
Yeah.
dare.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
lead climbing, the moves are becoming more and more frequently with less percentage moves,
Yeah.
so that you have a lower probability of sticking it, and you need to um, decide to go for the most tricky situation, the less safe option at the very first try, especially
Yeah.
like in lead, but also in bouldering because attempts matter. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a
So,
psychological trait here that needs to be developed for athletes.
yeah.
Now we're talking about the normal and general population, though.
Yeah.
This is not as important anymore,
Yeah.
right?
So, quick question, just something
Yeah.
that I thought of. Do we have anything that's within us that I guess we sometimes refer to as instinct.
Mm.
Instinct, is that something that's built within us, or is that something that is a learned aspect within how we perceive our surroundings?
You have given me two options. Like, is it this or that? That in my
Yeah.
idea
I don't
are not,
know. Like
not
it's,
mutually
I guess it's
exclusive.
just the way I'm thinking.
Uh-huh. But
Yeah.
in the way I see them are not mutually exclusive. But instinct and the way I see it, it's mostly the result of a lot of habits, is your default behavior.
Yeah.
It's something that is you can quickly recognize, and as in the environment, you can quickly categorize it, and you don't need to access explicit thinking
Yeah.
to interact with the world. It's the way that we interact with the world in most of the case.
Yeah.
Is automatic behavior, something that is learned, that is reinforced, that we engage with, we might seek, we might um, avoid, and it's very complex and specific to the context. So when we're talking about a very intuitive climber, We can think about someone that doesn't need to do much route reading and is able to navigate the route quite easily,
Yeah.
just by natural way of them recognizing the disposition of the holes in the space and knowing what is their preferred way of action when it comes to climbing that type of composition, that
Yeah.
type of disposition of holes.
Yeah.
Someone that is more analytical might look at the same route, read it carefully, and identify different sections where you say, okay, this is more tricky. I need to remember the specific sequence of footwork, for example, that I need to do there.
Yeah.
And most of us use a bit of both. There are some people that feel more safe in one. There are more people that feel more safe in the other, or that feel more comfortable in one or the other.
Okay.
And the way that they react to the environment. So, okay, I'm doing it by intuition, and I'm seeing how it goes. Most time it works. Sometimes it doesn't. There are low stakes for me. I'm just there having fun. It doesn't matter as much. I don't care as much as improving, for example. There's some people that would the mostly enjoy the environment of the climbing community rather than the achievement in climbing, for example.
Yeah. The social aspect.
Or you're someone that might be exactly, or you're someone that might be more achievement oriented. And if you're going for a fully automatic and intuitive climbing, you might recognize, if only I had seen that there was this foothold here that I couldn't see from my position,
Yeah.
I would have done that move.
Yeah.
Therefore, next time I would spend an extra 5 seconds to look at the holes on the wall,
Yeah. Okay.
for example. It really depends on a lot of different things. It's again, the environment is you might be like an achievement-oriented person, but if you're in a community that is incredibly strong and most of the attention is put on fun and doing crazy, stupid things because it makes people laugh and you have a great time, maybe your achievement orientation is not as important in that setting.
Yeah.
Or if you are in a climbing gym where community is terrible and you do not have fun, maybe the type of reward that you can find within climbing is in achievement.
Yeah.
It is context specific in this situation too. And even your traits can be changed depending on where you're placed.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I would say the most important takeaway is that you cannot make an accurate prediction.
Yeah. Okay.
Even if you know the person very well, you put them in a different situation, it's very difficult to say the person would act in a certain way.
So basically, what the conclusion is that it doesn't matter what behavioral traits come from genetics or nature, is that we can manipulate our behavior as long as we have the motivation to want to do so with the right support to achieve what we are willing to put energy into and achieve.
Yes. I would say yes with a little asterisk. That
Okay.
is, if you really want to do something, I think, and that's something it is reasonable within like the resources, including time.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I'm sure there is a lot that can be done towards that direction
Yeah.
in a lot of situations. The question it still is, are you sure you want to use those resources in that way?
Yeah.
Because our resources are limited and you need to choose how to use them. And maybe to make a little improvement in climbing, you need to train 5 times as hard and more often compared to improving in, I don't know, building your own robot for robot wars,
Yeah.
right? It's time that is taken for something else. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if it's something it's important and you're willing to put extra effort because maybe it's not the thing that comes most natural to you, absolutely go on with it. But also the narrative that whatever you want to do, you can. It's also we know that is not right. because again, it also implies sacrifice.
Yeah.
And you need to sacrifice something else. And sometimes motivation goes down simply because it is something that is not providing, giving you back enough compared to what you're putting in.
Yeah.
And that decreases motivation.
Yeah. 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 All
Or
good.
if climbing is
Yeah.
important to you and you feel like your improvement is very slow, but it doesn't matter, you're still gonna persevere, sure,
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be afraid of saying like of saying I'd rather do something else, or we should avoid judging ourselves as someone who gives up only because there are other things that you could do better with your time and energy and efforts,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm. Cool. I I think that's we can call that a wrap up, right? I
I
mean,
think
we can
so.
talk about nature, nurture, and so many things for so long. But yeah, I hope that you listeners have enjoyed listening to mostly Allegra talking and me asking questions. Um, if you have any other topics that you'd like us to talk about, send us an email, send us a message on social media. Always interested to find new stuff to talk about or people to interview. Thanks, Allegra, for your time.
Thank you for inviting me and for giving me so much space today too.
That's all right, no worries. And yeah, we'll catch you guys soon.